So, Race Hustler Rhetoric explained, coming right up. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Common Sense Logic Reason. As always, I want to say thank y'all for joining me today. So, as y'all know that I have my concept that I call Race Hustler Rhetoric. And the reason why I came up with this concept was basically listening to Black people repeat the same nonsense over and over again. And of course, reading the book, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Anybody that wants to get a crash course in Race Hustler Rhetoric, I suggest you read this book. You're going to get all the Race Hustler Rhetoric that you ask for. But anyway, Race Hustler Rhetoric is nothing but a series of examples that Black people try to give, as evidence that America is a racist country. And basically, the reason why I call it Race Hustler Rhetoric is that because these race hustlers out here, the people who profit off of race, who make a living in the name off of perpetuating in race, stoking the flames of race, these people will come up with the nonsense, and then other Black people will speak it to the point that it's just rhetorical. And this, like I say, this is why I call it Race Hustler Rhetoric. Now, I've identified 3 different types of Race Hustler Rhetoric. There are 3 different types of Race Hustler Rhetoric that you will run into. The first one is what I call end result thinking. Now, end result thinking is a process of finding any end result in society, any disparity that exists in America or in society that's unfavorable to Black people, and then they automatically assume that it's happening because of racism. They don't prove that the disparity exists because of racism. They don't prove that there's a system holding them back and causing the disparity. They just assume that it's racism because they've been indoctrinated with race. Now, a perfect example of this would be, more time for the same crime. It is true that Black people receive more time for the same crime. However, I've done videos on this, and it's for legitimate reasons. Suffice it to say, they don't prove that it's happening because of racism. They just assume that it's happening because of racism. Now, the second type of Race Hustler Rhetoric that you're going to run into is what I call historical crime. In other words, Black people crying about history. It's basically the same as end result thinking. They just find any historical event that's unfavorable to Black people, regardless how irrelevant it is, and they'll cry and cry and cry and cry. Again, because they have to, because they're victims. They must be victims because they've been indoctrinated into being victims. Now, a perfect example of historical crime would be redlining. Redlining is the number one example of Race Hustler Rhetoric that you ever run into, and that you will hear from Black people, and most Black people will speak it. At me, that is a knee-jerk reaction for them to say it. But let's hear them explain what it is. Different story, different matter. The fact is that redlining existed, but most of what they cry and complain about is stuff from the past that's no longer happening. Now, the third example of Race Hustler Rhetoric that you will run into is what I call fictitious notions. Again, this is just nonsense that Black people believe, have been indoctrinated and told to believe, but it's just simply not true. And just because they believe it and want to believe it is true, doesn't mean that doesn't mean that it is true. And probably the most of all the Race Hustler Rhetoric that you will run into will be fictitious notions. We again proving the point of how much nonsense that Black people believe that's just simply not true. Now, an example of fictitious notions would be the schools to prison pipeline. We've heard that nonsense. In other words, Black people are incarcerated at a much higher rate as for a percentage of population that we make up. Well, they want to blame it on the schools and not the bad parenting. Anyway, so the reason why, I make these episodes of Race Hustler Rhetoric is so that if you ever run into them, you ever hear them from Black folks, you can shut it down with logical thought and like basically with the points, the factual points. You can completely shut it down because in most cases, those black folks won't be able to defend it. Again, all they ever do is hear the examples, but they never hear people really truly defend it. That's why all they can do is tell you about the examples of Race Hustler Rhetoric, but as soon as you defend it, you just shut it all down. Anyway, y'all, so like I say, if you ever hear anybody crying about Race Hustler Rhetoric, watch my videos and you'll be able to destroy it. And as always, y'all, until next time.